This is Duke University.
So I just want to share with you guys one more story about a trip that I just made to Mexico about a month ago. I went to Mexico probably late November or early December this past month, and I went to go visit family. Right, I'm in Puebla, Mexico, about 2 hours from the capital. And I get to Puebla, and I take a ton of taxis everywhere because I don't know how to ride the bus system. So I'll take a taxi from 10-minute drive, but it's also a really cool opportunity to just talk to the taxi drivers. Right, that's my favorite part. And I was talking to one of the taxi drivers, and he was like, "What do you do?" And which is the hardest question in the world, right? And I'm like, "I'm a photographer." So I told him about my project, right? And I'm like, "Do you know the school of General Emiliano Zapata?" And he's like, "No, but I know General Emiliano Zapata." And he was like, "Do you know General Emiliano Zapata?" And I was like, "A little bit, probably not as much as you." And he was like, "General Emiliano Zapata is our pride. He's the pride of our country, right? Because he stood up for the indigenous rights of people in Chiapas, right? And people in Morelos." And I was like, "Tell me a little bit more, right?" And he was like, "General Emiliano Zapata left a legacy in Mexico." And I was like, "Okay." And he was like, he's the founder of the Zapatistas." And I'm like, "What are the Zapatistas?" And he was like, "The Zapatistas are an armed revolutionary force of Chiapas, right?" And I'm like, "Okay." And I was like, "How far is Chiapas?" He was like, 18 hours away. And I was like, "Okay." And I was like, "So what's so different about the Zapatistas?" And he was like, "The Zapatistas are the most incredible indigenous group and resistance group because they're a voice, they're a global voice, right?" And at this point, he has my attention. And I was like, "How do they look?" Right? And he was like, "They have the most beautiful, beautiful traditional dresses, but they wear black ski masks." And I was like, "Huh." Right? And he was like, "They wear pasamontañas too, which are orange bandanas." And I was like, "Okay." And I was like, "Can you go to these places?" And he was like, "No, because they're autonomous. They're autonomous lands, which means that nobody can get in there unless you're Zapatista." And I was like, "All right, let's pretend that I made it to Chiapas and I get to these autonomous lands. Can I get in?" And he was like, "I don't know." And I was like, "Can I pay them to get in?" And he was like, "I don't know, but maybe you can give them something from the land," right? And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "Their mantra is, aquí estuvimos, aquí estamos, y aquí estaremos." So we've been here, we are here, and we will stay here, right? So it's about the preservation of indigenous groups. And I was like, "Yo, that's incredible. That's awesome, right?" So 4 hours later, I'm in a bus heading to Chiapas, right? And in this bus, I meet this guy sitting next to me coming from Guerrero, Mexico. And Guerrero is like one of the most complicated places right now. Um, and he's like shaking. He's like terrified. And I'm just like, "Oh my God, what is wrong with this guy?" And he's scared, right? And I'm sitting next to this guy for like 4 hours. And finally, I'm like, "What's going on, man?" And he was like, soy un minero de Guerrero. I'm a miner from Guerrero." And I'm like, "Is everything okay?" And he was like, "Yeah, but I just got assaulted by one of the biggest cartels in Guerrero. So I'm heading home." And I was like, "Where are you going?" He's like, "Chiapas." All right? And I was like, "Perfect." So, I buy him a Coke. People come on the bus and they sell you all these little sabritas and Cokes and stuff. So I buy him one, I buy myself one, and we're just talking for hours. So I get to Chiapas like at 9 o'clock in the morning the next day. I look grungy, I look disgusting. He looks worse. And we just go separate ways, right? So now I'm in Chiapas, right? San Cristobal de las Casas, one of the most beautiful towns I've ever been to. And I start asking people, I'm like, "Hey, where are the Zapatistas?" And I hear the craziest stories I've ever heard, right? Some people are like, they died 10 years ago. Some people are like, they're extinct. They don't live here. They're in another state. And I'm like, "What?" So I spent the whole day asking random people about the Zapatistas. And I'm frustrated, right? Because nobody's giving me anything. And I'm like, either this is an incredible community or the taxi driver told me a lie. So, it's like 7 p.m. and I'm just like frustrated. So I go to this little taco stand, eat tacos. And I sit down, get my Coke, get my tacos al pastor, and I'm sitting there, and I see the guy from the bus, right? And I'm like, hey, what's up, man? And, we share tacos. And we're talking to each other, we're having fun. And he was like, did you find the Zapatistas? And I was like, no. I was like, people told me that they died. They were killed in war or something. And he was like, sorry to hear that. And yeah, so I left, right? And, I asked for the bill. And I'm like, you know what, man? Let me pay for your tacos. So I pay for his tacos, pay for his Coke, pay for my food, and I'm about to head out. And he stands up and he's like, you know what? Maybe you should go to Oventique. And I was like, what's Oventique? And he was like, ahí vas a encontrar lo que buscas. You're going to find what you're looking for, right? And I'm like, weird, okay. So I write down the name, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to go check out Oventique. So I wake up at like 5 o'clock in the morning the next day, because I have no idea where Oventique is, right? I don't know if it's 5 hours away. I don't know if it's 10 hours away. It's not on a map. It's not on Google Maps. It's not on Apple Maps. And I go to the little bus terminal, and I'm like, hey, do you guys go to Oventique? And they're like, no, we don't go there. And I keep asking for like 20 minutes, and I'm like, hey, can I go to Oventique? And they're like, no, we don't go to Oventique. And finally, one guy's like, you know what? I'll take you, man. But you got to pay for the whole taxi. And I was like, fine. So I pay for the whole taxi, and get in the taxi, and we start driving, right? So Chiapas has the most beautiful mountain ranges you can imagine. So we're driving through the mountains, and the weather's like perfect. I mean, the sun's beautiful. You can see the hills. You can see the mountains. I mean, it's gorgeous. And, we're playing music, and we're having fun. And I'm like, yes, I'm going to go to Oventique, and I'm going to meet the Zapatistas, and I'm going to get in. And we're driving for like 45 minutes. And then out of nowhere, it goes from super, super bright to white, right? We jump into mist, into clouds. And I'm like, well, that was weird. I was like, this is kind of eerie, right? And then it just dropped temperature, like 10, 15 degrees. It was freezing. It went from hot to freezing in a few minutes. And I was like, this is really, really, really weird, right? And we're driving, and we can maybe see like 10 feet ahead of the taxi. That's how thick the clouds are, right? And we drive maybe for like 2 more minutes, 2, 3 more minutes, and he stops. And I don't see anything, right? And he's like, all right, we're here. And I'm like, okay. So I get out the taxi, and I don't see anything. And he was like, you just got to walk over there, but you have to pay me first. So I pay him, and then he just left. I was like, oh, God. I was like, oh, God. And I walk up to this community, and I'm like stumbling my way through the mist, and I don't see anything, right? And I keep walking, and I see this like black wooden pole, right? And then there's like a black flag attached to it. And I was like, that's weird. And I look to my left, and then there's this huge gate, like a pillar. And I look inside it, and there's an indigenous lady, right, wearing beautiful folkloric red dress, like red threads, gorgeous. But she's wearing like a black ski mask. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I'm gonna die. I was like, oh my God. And then I look to my right, and then there's another pillar, right? And I'm like, and I see this like another indigenous lady in blue threads, but she's wearing a black ski mask too. And I'm like, oh my God. And I was like, oh my God. And it's weird because it's autonomous lands, right? So you leave every sense of security that you have. There's no law there. They are the law. And I'm standing there, and I was like, I don't know if I should be here. And I've traveled a ton of places, right? And I've never really felt scared, right? Because I'm always like, if I get hit by a car, the cops will come help me. And at that moment, I was like, you know what? I don't know if the cops will come to help me here. And I keep walking, and then I see this black metal gate. And I like walk up to it, right? And I'm standing, and there's an indigenous lady to my left and an indigenous lady to my right. And I'm like trying to see through the mist, and there's this like long hill, right? And it's filled with clouds. And I can kind of see like buildings following the hill. And I'm standing there. No, the indigenous ladies don't move. They just stand there where they're sitting. And I'm looking and I'm just like, where's everybody, right? So I'm looking down and it's pitch white. It's freezing. And I'm looking and I'm like, I don't have my glasses on, so I'm like kind of looking. And I'm looking straight down and I see clouds, right? And out of the clouds, walk out 3 men in black ski masks. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna die today. And they're walking up. I mean, it was dramatic. I mean, it was I couldn't even believe it. And they're walking up to me, or so I thought, right? And they're like 5 feet away from me, and then they make a left, right? And I'm like, where are they going? And it turns out there's these 2 other people by the guard post. And there's these 2 Italian guys, right? And I can hear them talking. And the leader of the Zapatista, he says, what's your name? Where are you from? And how long have you been here, right? And they give their names. And they're like, we're from Italy, right? And then they're like, we've been looking for the Zapatistas for 18 months, right? And I'm like, whoa, right? And he doesn't say anything. The leader of the Zapatista doesn't say anything. He just leaves, right? So he takes his 2 other guys, and they just go back down into the hill. And they're gone for like an hour. We're standing there in the code. They're gone for an hour, right? So an hour later, they come back. They do the exact same dramatic entrance, and they make a left. And they're like, sorry, you can't come in. And I was like, ooh, right? And the guy had said he was a student, and the other guy had said he was a photographer. And I was like, there goes my plan A and my plan B, right? And they're like, all right, you have to jump out of here. And I'm just like, oh, God. I was like, I'm next. And they take them to the curb, and they wait till a car passes by, and they put them in the car, and they leave. And they're like frustrated, they're like cursing, right? I'm just like, oh, God. And I'm just standing there they don't even acknowledge me for like hour and a half. And then they come up to me, and they're like, what's your name? Where are you from? And how long have you been here? Right? And I was like, okay. I was like, all right. And at this point, I see my entire life flash in front of me, right? I see my entire life. I remember every conversation that I've had regarding the Zapatistas, and I'm just like skimming through memories, articles, links, everything, right? And I'm like, Saul Flores, come from the United States. And he was like, how long have you been here? And I'm like skimming through articles in my head. And I'm like, aquí estuve, aquí estoy, y aquí estaré. And then I'm like, oh God. I was like, oh God, I'm gonna die today. And I think the guy's like puzzled. He doesn't know what to say. And he just leaves. And I'm like, all right, no, there goes my chance, right? And he goes away for another hour. And I'm standing there like an idiot, right? And I'm sitting at the black gate. He comes back later on, and he comes up to me, right? And he's like, ¿Qué noticias nos traes? What news do you bring us? And I was like, I have no news in my head, right? And I'm like, all right, maybe this is the bribe. Maybe this is the bribe, right? So I pull out a kilo of rice and a kilo of beans. And I give it to him. And he's just like, this guy just pulled out 2 kilos of food from his backpack. And I give it to him, right? And he takes it, and he just disappears. And I'm like, oh my God. I was like, all right, made it to round 2, right? Made it to round 2. Sorry. And he goes back down for like another hour. And at this point, I'm like trembling. I'm so cold. And he comes back, and he was like, how long do you want to be here? And I was like, okay. I was like, okay, we're making progress. And I was like, 4 days. And he was like, no. But we'll let you in for 2 hours. And I was like, okay. I was like, all right. I was like, okay. I was like, okay. It's perfect, right? So I walk inside the gate, and then they take me to the Junta de Buen Gobierno. So the Junta de Buen Gobierno is the government of each caracol. There's 5 caracoles for the Zapatista communities. Oventica is the first caracol and the biggest caracol. And he's like, wait outside. And then he brings out, I thought it was a tour guide, but it was more like a bodyguard or somebody that was just watching me. And he's wearing this black ski mask, and I'm like, all right, perfect, right? So I pull out my camera, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna take the best pictures in the world. And he was like, you can't take pictures here. And I was like, oh, and I was like, because my experience in traveling is showing that experience to people like you, right? For me, it's not necessarily being there, it's bringing what was there to spaces like this. And he was like, you can take pictures of everything you want, but you just can't take pictures of people. He was like, you just can't take pictures of people. And I was like, okay, I'll take it, right? So we're walking around, and it's these beautiful, 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 beautiful buildings. I mean, political murals, revolutionary murals, Che, Frida, General Emiliano Zapata, everybody. I mean, it was gorgeous. The whole town was full of colors, right? And I'm like, oh my God. And it's gorgeous, right? Because the women are wearing pasamontañas, which is, it's these guys right here. So you have these like beautiful folkloric threads, and then they have like these orange bandanas. And the guys are wearing the black ski mask, and I'm like, oh my God. Visually, it's a picture. I mean, it's a story, right? And he gives me, I'm like walking around for like an hour. He's not really saying much. I'm like, hey, what's your name? He's like, my name doesn't matter. I mean, this community is impenetrable. And I'm like, how long have you guys been here? He doesn't tell me anything. I mean, it was like one of the first times that I go into a community with questions and I come out with more questions, right? And we're walking, and I'm like, all right. I was like, I need to get at least one picture of a person. I have to, right? And I'm like, all right, I have to be smart because it can't be a staged picture. It has to be just like a natural shot of a person. So, so we're walking for like an hour and a half. We pass all these beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous buildings. And I see this black mural, right? It's like a black wall, on the side of a house. And there's these silver silhouettes of the Zapatistas, right? So all you see is these silver silhouettes of the Zapatista mask and the people, right? It was like super tribal, super gorgeous. And I was like, all right, that's the spot. I was like, that's the spot, I know it. And he's walking, and he walks right in front of the mural. And I'm like, Señor, and he turns around, right? So I'm like looking at him. He's standing in front of the mural. It's beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. And I'm like, Señor, ¿le gusta café? Do you like coffee? And he was like, sí. And I was like, ¿cómo se toma su café? And he was like, negro. And he was like, which is black. And then he was like, I was like, do you like milk in your coffee? He was like, no. And I was like, do you like sugar? And he was like, yeah, I like sugar. So I pull out 1/2 kilo of sugar, and I give it to him, right? And he looks at me, and he's like, he's puzzled, right? He's puzzled. And I'm like, Señor, le prometí a mi mamá que iba a venir aquí y tomar fotos y se los iba a enseñar cuando regresara. I was like, sir, I promised my mother that I would come here and I would take pictures and I would show them to her. I was like, can I please take a picture of you? And he's standing there, right? And he's wearing his black ski mask so I could just see his eyes. And there's like this awkward silence for like 60 seconds. He's just looking at me in my eyes, right? He's standing in front of the mural. And I'm like, oh, please. And he was like, I'll give you one picture. And I was like, yes. I was like, yes, right? I was like, okay, I'm good. I got it. And I pull out my Canon 7D, right, which is like the nicer camera. And I'm about to take a picture. And he was like, no, not with that one. And I was like, oh. Which he was like, con la otra. And I was like, which one? And he was like, el otro, the cell phone. And I was like, oh no. I was like, no, not the iPhone. And I'm like, okay. I was like, I can't be greedy. So I like pull out my iPhone, right? And I'm like, clean up my little screen. And I like pull it up to him. And I'm about to start playing with the settings, right? I click on it. And I'm like, just getting ready. And he was like, that's it. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I failed. I was like, I just failed. I was like, I just failed this trip, right? I accidentally took a picture, was about to get my settings right. I failed. And I don't even look at my phone. I'm just frustrated at this point, right? And I'm just like, oh my God. You know, I traveled 20 hours. I talked my way to get into the Zapatista community. He gave me a shot. I bribed like 2 people to get this one shot of the Zapatistas, and I failed. And it was a really low point for me, right? I was like, I just failed. I was like, I failed as a journalist. I failed as a photojournalist. I failed as a photographer. And I'm disappointed, so I put my phone away, and I'm just, you know, the experience is dead for me. And I leave, right? I just leave the community and wait for a taxi, and I jump out. So get back to my hostel, and I'm reviewing my pictures, and this is the photograph that I got. So these are the Zapatistas. So my next project is going to be called Skin of the Natives. And it's a 12-chapter excursion to the many regions of Mexico, documenting the many indigenous groups of the area. This picture was taken on my first week of chapter 1. So yeah, that's the project.